In this video, we're going to be talking about our first SPSS activity, correlation 1. This is a pretty basic correlation, just looking at the relationship between two variables here that we'll take a look at. Those variables being shoe size and reading level that, again, we're gonna look at here as we go. You should be able to find a document that's going to have the data as well as the questions to answer along the way. Go ahead and open that up so you can follow along with me, and also get a blank SPSS sheet opened up as well. Remember, I recommend doing this in a web browser, but that is your choice how you want to go about getting that open. Once you have those ready to go, continue on and we'll get started. All right, so you should have this assignment opened up. It is our correlation activity. Again, we're going to be looking at the relationship here between shoe size and reading level. So in this particular case, this is a group of grade school children around middle school age, and they have some different variables that were measured about them. So the teacher measured their shoe size and also took a score on a reading level standardized test. With this, they hypothesized that there would be a strong positive correlation between these two variables, that we would see that relationship appearing in the data. So we're going to go ahead and test this hypothesis, but first we need to kind of do a few different steps along the way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this data. It's just this information. There's no Excel sheet. It's just this information. We're going to take this data and we're going to move it over into SPSS. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and get my blank SPSS window open. And remember, I have the two views. I'm always going to start with my variable view down here at the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and go here and set up my variables first before I enter my data. So the variables that I have, let's take a look quickly again. We're going to include participant number, but also then we have shoe size and reading level. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. Let's follow along on the sheet as well if you need to. So we're going to add in our participant number, remembering not to include any spaces. SPSS does not like spaces. Then we have our shoe, shoe size. When you have multiple words like this, what I do is I just capitalize the first letter of each word, and that helps, give me some indication of a clear variable name without having those spaces there. And then of course, reading level. Reading level. Let's go ahead and check this first piece of information here that we have, whether or not we have numeric variables. And if we look at our data here, we can see that yes, we do have numeric variables for each of our pieces of data that we have: participant number, shoe size, and reading level. With defaults to 8, that's how many spaces it's going to allow us to enter in for each variable. We have plenty of space with 8. We don't need to change that. And for our decimals, if we just glance at our data, let's take a look real quick. We have no decimals for participant number. Our shoe size, each data point uses 1 decimal point. And same thing with our reading level. Those all use 1 decimal point as well. So we're going to go ahead and change the decimals to be 0 and then 1 for each of those. Now we're going to talk about something new today as well, and that is this measurement tab over here. And you'll notice that question 1 on our assignment sheet is going to ask us what are the variables and how are they measured in this study. So the two we're really concerned with are shoe size and reading level. And it's asking us how they're being measured: nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. And that's what we're going to select under this measure here: nominal, ordinal, and then interval and ratio are actually grouped together in SPSS as scale here. So if we think about how these measurements work, we can determine that both of these are going to be scale in nature, but it's up to you to tell me whether or not they are interval or ratio between the two. So go ahead and answer that for question 1, and we'll move on to the next step here as we go. So the next step is to actually switch over to our data view down here at the bottom. And now we see our variables set along the top: our participant number, our shoe size, and our reading level. So I'm going to go ahead and take the data from my Word document, copy it, and then put it into SPSS. Now remember, when we're looking at this data, when we copy this, make sure that you're only selecting the actual data and nothing else. Don't get the variable names, just the data itself. You should then be able to copy this data. And now hopefully when we go into SPSS, we can single select. Remember, we want that gray box to appear just on that first space. And we should be able to paste our data in and see it appear like this. Now, again, remember there are different ways to paste. You could try right click, paste, or even going up to edit and paste. If you're struggling with this, if it's really just not working for you, you can always manually enter the data. There is a small enough amount of it that it's possible to do, but hopefully this works for you and keeps things simple. All right, with this set up correctly, let's go back and take a look at the next step. So our next step for question 2 is to actually run our analysis. So we have the data in, we have it entered. So the next thing we need to do is run that analysis, and then we're going to talk about the output and what a lot of those results mean as we go. So to run a simple correlation analysis, we're going to start by going to the Analyze tab up here at the top. From this Analyze tab, we're going to look for something that's relevant to what we need to do, and we get lucky because correlate is actually one of these first options. From here, we know we're going to choose one of these. We just now need to figure out which of these we want to choose. The one we're actually going to go with is called the bivariate correlation. You can think of it as bivariate, or bi meaning two variable relationship. So since we're looking at the relationship between shoe size and reading level, we have two variables. We want to do this bivariate correlation. So if I select this, it's going to pop up a new window that is where I am going to select and input all of my data. Or I should say, choose which variables I want to be included in this analysis. So participant number is not something we need to include. So we're just going to take shoe size and move this over into our included variables list, and reading level and move that over into our included variables list. Notice we're doing a Pearson correlation that's two-tailed, and we want to flag our significant correlations. I'm going to do one more thing here before I hit OK and run this, and that's go up to my options in the top right, select this, and I'm going to check the box to include means and standard deviations. You can keep this as exclude case pairwise, that's totally fine. Just make sure you check that first box under options and go ahead and hit continue. Now with that selected, our variables in, we can hit OK, and that's going to run our analysis and pull up our output window with our correlation that we need to kind of talk through and think about. The first box is our descriptive statistics. This is here because we checked that box to include our means and standard deviations. It's just helpful to kind of see what these are a lot of the time. The next box is our correlation output and our correlation table that's going to show us that correlation and relationship between our variables that we have. Let me kind of break down this box for you first and talk about how this table is set up and works. First thing I want you to note is that we have our variables listed along the left-hand side and along the top here as well. So whenever we're looking at a correlation table, what we're looking for is where do the variables intersect one another in this table. That's going to show us the relationship between those two variables. So if I look to see where does shoe size intersect reading level, I can see this section here is an intersection point between the two different variables. Now, I could also look at this intersection point between shoe size and reading level, and you'll notice that I actually get the same exact information between these 2 points. So it does not matter which one you look at. Order never matters in a correlation. So we can choose either of these places in the table and use that to determine the values associated with that particular correlation or relationship between our two variables. So this gives us 3 numbers to focus on. We have our Pearson correlation, our significance, and our N value. Let's start with the end value because it's the simplest. That just tells us how many participants we have in this analysis. You can see we have 20 participants. If you go back and look at your data, you'll notice there are 20 participants included. Next, we have our Pearson correlation value. This is our R value, and you'll notice that the next question is actually asking us what this value is under question 2. So the Pearson correlation, or the R value, in our case here is going to be 0.920. Now it's important to note what this means. We'll come back to this in a second. The next value we have is our significance value, or our p-value, and this is less than 0.001. And again, that's that next question asked on or under question 2. It's now asking us whether or not this correlation between shoe size and reading level is significant based on this p-value. So we need to interpret what that value is telling us and whether or not it gives us a significant relationship or not. So when we look at this p-value, we look to see, is it below 0.05? If it is below 0.05, in our case, we would determine that it is a significant correlation between our variables. We use this cutoff because this is the number, really what this value, what this p-value is telling us, is what's the chance that we found this correlation due to just random error or random occurrence in the data. Now, that's always possible, that's why we're seeing relationships is random occurrence. It might just happen in the data, but we don't want that to really be why we found a relationship. So we look for this number to be low, indicating that there's a pretty low chance that we're seeing this relationship due to random occurrence. And so instead, we're expecting that this relationship is due to some meaning, some meaningful aspects of these variables' relationship. So we look for a low random chance or a low p-value, meaning that there's a lot more value in our findings. So if that chance is less than 0.05, then that's the cutoff we use to say this is considered to be significant. So since this is actually less than 0.001, well below 0.05, we would say that yes, this is in fact a significant correlation. And in fact, SPSS gives us a little cheat sheet here by marking that correlation with those two little stars. So that's telling us that it is significant at the 0.01 level, which means it's also significant at the 0.05 level as well. All right, so we've now answered question 2 and all of the components to that. Let's take a look at question 3 and talk more about what this correlation value actually means. So question 3 is asking how close to either positive or -1 this value is. How do we interpret this correlation? So when we talk about the Pearson correlation value, or this R value, this will always fall somewhere between the value of -1 and +1. It can range anywhere inside of that range. If it falls here, let me actually just let me pull something up for us here. Let me just do this. Let's keep this simple and just make this here. So -1 and +1, it's always going to fall somewhere inside of this range. This is our R value. If it is at 0, we actually say that there's no correlation that we see. If it's towards the positive end, we say that there's a positive correlation. If it's towards the negative end, we say it's a negative correlation. Now, the strength of the correlation depends on how close it is. Is it, somewhere over here saying it's pretty strong, it's close to +1, or is it, maybe somewhere over closer to 0 where it's a little bit weaker? That applies to both sides of this. If it's close to 0 but negative, it's still relatively weak. And if it's close to -1, it's pretty strong. So that strength really depends on how close to 0 is it in either direction. The direction is whether or not it's positive or negative. So both of those pieces of information are important when interpreting this relationship between these variables. So let's go back to our output and look at what we got. So we got a value of 0.920, right? So if we look at that on our scale, right, 0.920 is going to be really pretty close to 1, it's pretty strong and it's pretty positive. So when we interpret this value, we're going to say that there was a pretty strong positive correlation between reading level and shoe size, right? So if we're looking at question 3, what can we infer about this relationship? Well, we know it's strong, we know it's positive, and that means that as we see increases in one variable, we're going to see increases in the other variable. But also, when we see decreases in one variable, we're going to see decreases in the other variable. So the variables change in the same direction pretty strongly together. They really pair strongly in the direction that they change. This is going to make more sense when we take a look at a graph here in a second. But for now, understand that the variables are changing in the same direction and that it's a strong relationship between them. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next question, which is question 4, and that is actually going to have us create a graph. So to do this, we're going to go up to graphs up in the top here. We're going to choose graphs, and we want to, for a correlation, we want to choose a scatter plot. Now the instructions show for older versions of SPSS. In this newer version, these all just appear here, and we can just pick the one we want, in this case scatter or dot. If you're working on an older version of SPSS, you're going to see something that's called legacy dialogues down here, and it's going to scroll over and pop out basically all of these options. It's just an extra step. But for us, we can go ahead and just scroll down until we find scatter or dot and select this as a graph to include. We can keep it at simple scatter, that's perfect, and then we want to define this graph. From here, the only things we need to pay attention to are our X and Y axis. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put shoe size on my X and reading level on my Y axis. It does not matter which one you choose, just pick one for each of them. It can be flipped. It won't make a difference when we're interpreting this graph. All right, with those two entered into the two axes, I can go ahead and hit OK, and that's going to create my graph and put it into my output window here. So when we take a look at this graph, we can see a few different things. Number one, we see our shoe size along the bottom, we see our reading level along the top, and each point that we see on this graph is representing one participant. We can do that. We can select one and just kind of confirm this. This person has a shoe size of about 6.5 and a reading level of about maybe 59. And we could look at our data and find someone with a shoe size of 6.5 and a reading level of about 59. So we know that point is actually participant 13 right here. Now that's not really necessary. We're not looking at individual participants. What we're really interpreting here is the overall trend of the data. And what we see is a positive kind of sloping trend of this data, where values that are higher in shoe size are corresponding to values that are higher in reading level, and values that are lower in shoe size are corresponding to values that are lower in reading level. That's why we get this positive slope, and that's showing us this positive correlation. Because of how clear this is, how tight of a line, that is due to the strength of the correlation. Being very close to 1 gives us this really tight line of data points that we see showing up here in this graph. So go ahead for question 4, interpret this graph. Tell us, does it offer any additional insights or findings? Does it propose anything different? Hopefully it doesn't, but I'm going to go ahead and let you answer question 4 based on what we just talked about for this graph. Question 5 is dealing with basically just correlations in general and how correlations work. So when we look at correlational studies, one of the limiting factors we can talk about is that we really can't talk about causation here in this case. Only that these variables tend to change together, not that one of them is causing the other one to change. And so if we look at our variables, we're not saying that because you have a bigger shoe size, you're going to have a higher reading level, or that because you have a higher reading level, you're going to have a larger shoe size, just that we tend to see those things occurring at the same time together. Now, again, in this particular example, there's another variable, a third variable that might be related to both of these and may actually be the driving factor of why we're seeing this relationship. So maybe you can think of what that is. Maybe there's a couple different ones you can come up with. The one that most people tend to think about is the idea of age, right? So age is a third variable. It's kind of the answer to question 5. That is probably the driving factor here. Those who are older have a higher reading level and have larger shoe sizes than those who are younger. And so again, in this example, it's really easy to find that third variable. It's easy to find something that explains this relationship. However, in many other correlations, and probably also other correlations we're going to do in this class, it might not be as easy to find what that third variable is. But it's important to remember that that's always sort of there, lurking in the background, that there could be some other variable that is driving this relationship. And so we need to be careful how we interpret and how much weight we give to just correlational results alone, looking at those relationships. So I just wanted to mention that and keep that in mind as we go throughout the rest of the semester with correlations, this sort of third variable problem and the limiting effect that we have of correlation analysis. All right, lastly, what we have is question 6. And what I want you to do for question 6 is to, I apologize. What I want you to do for question 6 here is I want you to practice writing up these results and write up these results in APA format following this example here. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a sentence that just explains in normal terms what you found, what the correlation showed, just using normal English. Then you report your statistics here in this very specific format. You start with your R value, which is going to be equal to whatever your Pearson's correlation value was. Remember, for us, that was that value of let's see, what was it? 0.920. So that's going to be our R value. And then you would indicate what your p-value was. Again, for us, similar to this example, less than 0.001. Inside these parentheses here is actually your degrees of freedom. What that is n, or how many participants you had, minus 2. So remember to include that here as n, the number of participants we had, minus 2. So we had 20 participants, and minus 2. We should have 18 in parentheses here. So go ahead for this last question, practice writing up what you found using this format, and you will arrive sort of at the way that we would write up an APA result. All right, and with that, I will leave you here. Good job. Thank you guys for following along, and I hope this was helpful. Quick edit I wanted to make, I forgot to mention, part of your submission for this assignment is including your output window showing that you completed this in SPSS. The easiest way to go about showing this and including this in your submission is to take screenshots of your output and include that in your submission file. So the best way to do that, if you are on Windows, is going to be to use probably the screenshot or the snipping tool. So you can either do Windows Shift S or just type in the snipping tool to open this up and create a new screenshot. I can do this by just clicking new and then selecting kind of the part that I want copied. I can then copy this and then just come down to my document, and at the very end, just simply paste in the screenshot of that data. So I'm going to do this for my 2 tables and then do this again for my graph just to show that I have that as well. I'm going to make a new snip, make sure that I include this screenshot of the graph, copy and paste this in the bottom of my document. So just make sure that you include all of the screenshots of your output in your submission file. If you're on a Mac, I believe it's Command Shift or actually we can look this up together. Let's see, Mac screenshot. So it looks like you can do Shift Command and 3 to capture your whole screen, or Shift Command and 4 to be able to select and highlight a certain portion of your screen. That's probably what I would recommend you do, so you can just capture those sections that you need, and then you can paste them into your document for your submission. So make sure to include that output as well to get full credit on this assignment. All right.